In this show, Stallone plays a mafia capo by the name of Dwight Manfredi. He has spent the last 25 years of his life in prison after volunteering to be the fall guy to protect the family. So naturally, when he eventually gets out of prison, he expects a warm welcome. However, he is in for a rude awakening at the boss's house. This is the boss, Pete, and this fella is his son Charles. He has become an underboss and he's responsible for most daily operations now, which is weird for Dwight because he knew Charles since he was a baby, and now Charles outranks Dwight. As if that wasn't a hard enough pill to swallow, Dwight is being asked to head out to Tulsa, Oklahoma, because the family claims that they need to explore uncharted territory to right the ship. Business hasn't been great and they see potential in Tulsa. Dwight knows that's a bunch of crap and that he's being banished so that he doesn't upset the hierarchy of the family. After knocking out Charles' most trusted capo Vince for disrespecting him, Dwight reluctantly agrees to go to Tulsa. Every week he'll have to send $5,000 to the family, and even though this adventure isn't what he wants, he embraces the challenge to show them how it's done. It becomes quite entertaining once Dwight gets to Tulsa. There he meets a cabbie by the name of Tyson. Their different backgrounds, their age difference, and contrasting personalities lead to quite a few hilarious exchanges before they eventually arrive at a marijuana dispensary. Dwight looks around the place and wants to meet the owner, but this absolute unit stands in his way. No problem though. Dwight flings Tyson's thermos at the guy to knock him out, and out comes the owner, Bodie. Dwight introduces himself and makes the classic "I'll protect you in exchange for a cut" speech, but Bodie's like, protect me from what exactly? And he's got a point because they're in the middle of nowhere, which makes this situation rather funny. Dwight can't believe how much this place is making. There's $500,000 in the safe, and he gets his first 20% cut before going on his merry way. So this is the first place he offers protection. Dwight tells Tyson to buy an SUV and work for him for $2,000 a week, which Tyson gladly accepts. The problem is the car salesman thinks Tyson is a drug dealer after seeing him with that much cash, so Dwight pays the salesman a personal visit to correct his behavior. He is definitely persuasive. Dwight wants to turn the dispensary into his personal cash cow, so he advises Bodie to launder the cash, and he also wants to meet Bodie's supplier because some of them have connections to cartels, and Dwight wants to get ahead of a potential problem on that front. He then ditches the shitty motel he was staying at and moves to a fancy one, the Mayo, and later he heads back to the bar he visited the previous night. There he strikes up a conversation with the owner, Mitch Keller, a former bull rider who got addicted to painkillers, which eventually led to him spending some time in prison. It looks like he's gonna become an associate of Dwight in the future. Then Dwight is hit on by a couple of women who are on a bachelorette party, and he takes them to a strip club to show them what a real party is like. Stacy Beale in particular takes an interest in Dwight, and they get it on at the hotel before Stacy realizes just how old Dwight is. She looks about 50 and Dwight is 75 years old, so when she learns this, she is freaked out, and she leaves as Dwight sits there while another person walks out on him. As you can imagine, going to prison has ruined his personal life. His wife walked out on him and his daughter hasn't spoken to him in 18 years, probably ever since she's been able to grasp what his father does for a living. Toward the end of the episode, we see a letter Dwight kept for all these years. He got it from his daughter 2 decades ago, and she sent $5 from her allowance so that her father could buy something from the store, which is really sweet, and this is the only connection Dwight has to his family, this letter. But if you thought that was sad, hold on to your seats because it turns out that Stacy works for the worst federal agency in the country, the ATF. Just imagine sleeping with an ATF agent. That is tragic even for an average Joe, but it's obviously worse for Dwight because he's a criminal. Also in this episode, a sketchy-looking man spots Dwight at the mall, while the FBI alerts the ATF about Dwight's presence in Tulsa, and Stacy learns about this after sleeping with Dwight, so she is shocked, and things are about to get even weirder between these two. It is too early to talk about the main plot, but I like all the conflicts they've set up here. Dwight is up against law enforcement. He unknowingly slept with a federal agent. He's got issues with the members of his own mafia family. He's in a city he doesn't know, so he might be hoodwinked by some unknown threat. And all of that means that the story is unpredictable, and at this stage of a show, that is ideal. The second episode further demonstrated what type of a show this will be. Tulsa King has more of a day in the life of vibe, instead of a classic prestige drama with a heavy focus on the main storyline. We watch Dwight run some errands in town as he tries to find a way to get in touch with his daughter, for which he apparently needs a credit card. The same thing happens when he tries to send a package to New York. He has to send $5,000 a week to the family, and he learns that he has to use a card to pay for shipping. He wonders what's happened to the saying cash is king, and he eventually gets a stranger to sort it out in exchange for some cash. Dwight knows that getting a credit card could be difficult since he doesn't have any legitimate sources of income. Luckily though, Tyson recommends picking up a debit card, and they go to the bank only to learn that Dwight's ID has expired, all the way back in '99. So he tries to renew his driver's license and persuades the clerk by bribing her. So she gives him a temporary license that he can use to practice until his driving test, and he can use that at the bank as ID to finally pick up his debit card. Afterward, he pays $10 to a public records website and he's able to call his daughter. His husband picks up the phone, which is awkward because Dwight didn't even know she was married. They even have kids. And his daughter, Christina, doesn't want to talk to him. Dwight tells her husband Emery that he just wants to hear his daughter's voice. Christina obliges and lets him hear her voice, and then promptly ends the call. Earlier in the day, Stacy visited Dwight in his hotel room to tell him that she is an ATF agent, and she brought up Christina during this conversation. Here, Dwight told Stacy he wanted Christina to stop seeing him in prison because it was too hard on her, but at the end of the episode, at a spot called the Center of the Universe where supposedly no one can hear you, Dwight admits to himself that he stopped seeing Christina because it was too hard on him, not her. Obviously, this has been the most significant emotional theme of the show so far. Dwight feels regret and remorse for failing his daughter and losing contact with her. Up until this moment, he hasn't even been able to admit that simple fact to himself, but he has finally taken that step and has shown progress. Maybe now he can do something about it. As for Stacy, we see her ask a friend about Dwight, and then she talks to her therapist about him, claiming that she won't see him again. Later on, she makes it clear to Dwight that she won't be able to help him out if he ever gets in trouble. We pay a quick visit to New York, where Vince's mandible bone is broken in 3 places after being on the receiving end of Dwight's punch. He thinks that as a made man, he deserves more respect, so basically he'd like to kill Dwight. Chicky urges Vince to calm down, but he knows this problem isn't just gonna go away. So he talks to his father, Pete, and they agree that Dwight should pay Vince $100,000 to apologize. When Dwight finds out about this, he jokes by saying, quote, "Alright, I'll send him something, but if you hear it ticking, don't open it." End quote. I just love how sarcastic and petty Dwight gets. It's kinda endearing in a twisted way. Vince isn't the only person Dwight ought to look out for. There's also Armand, the man who spotted Dwight at the mall, who's a member or a former member of the Invernizzi mafia family. From the way he behaves in this episode, Armand clearly did something bad to Dwight in the past because he has a fear of retribution. He thinks Dwight is in Tulsa to kill him. Armand calls up the Mayo to find out if Dwight is staying there, and someone at the reception confirms that to be the case. Also, Armand is running some sort of a gambling racket because someone approaches him with a bet. Elsewhere, Dwight talks to Bodie's supplier Jimmy and gets Bodie a better deal, but not before he has a small run-in with Jimmy's enforcer Badface. What a fitting nickname. Previously, Bodie's business was paying $1,200 per unit for a 10-unit order, but this new deal means they'll be paying an average of $785 per unit for a 300-unit order. Dwight sure knows how to drive a hard bargain. He threatens to walk away and go to another supplier when Jimmy doesn't budge, and then he makes this wholesale agreement to satisfy both parties. Jimmy sells a good amount of product, while Bodie gets his supply for cheaper. On the way back, Dwight gets stoned and rambles about the current generation. He rants about pronouns and a couple of playwrights from New York, because why not, he's high. And later on we see Tyson get back home late at night, which let's just say doesn't alleviate his father's concern. Tyson's father, Mark, looks like a straight shooter, and he thinks Tyson should be in college instead of driving around a gangster. This week, Armand rudely interrupts Dwight's driving exam and almost kills the instructor Paul, but luckily Dwight notices the masked man and saves both himself and the poor instructor. While Paul freaks out in an understandably hilarious fashion, Dwight chases the hitman through Tulsa's streets and manages to hit the hitman's car, though Armand still gets away thanks to Dwight's massive SUV being unable to get through a swath of cars. Dwight uses Paul's blood to write down a partial license plate on the windshield, and the police are understandably interested in this kerfuffle. Dwight warns Paul to say that he didn't see anything, and Paul obliges. The police obviously run Dwight's name through the system, and they learn who he is. They know he's not telling them what he knows, but they can't do anything about it, especially because Stacy finds out about this and she gets Dwight out of there, telling one of the officers that Dwight is part of a bigger investigation. Afterward, Dwight buys Stacy some dinner and they spend the night together at the Mayo, with Stacy telling him once again that this was the last time this would happen, which we all know isn't true. We learned a bit more about Stacy in the restaurant. She was a respected officer thanks to her work during and after 9/11, but a few years later, she mistook Sully's landing on the Hudson River for another attack, but as it turned out, it was just a pilot trying to safely land a commercial flight. After this mistake, she was sent to Tulsa, and it's clear that she's never mentally recovered, because why else would she continue to sleep with a mafia capo? Back to Dwight, he calls Chicky to accuse Vince of putting out the hit, and Chicky feels insulted by the insinuation that he can't control his guys. So this prompts Dwight to conduct his own investigation. He pays Paul a visit at the hospital, who agrees to look into the partial plate in exchange for 10 grand. This way, Dwight's able to track down the car Armand used. Armand tried to torch it, and I say tried to because he closed the doors without opening the windows, so the flames went out as there wasn't enough oxygen inside the car. Dwight collects some evidence with Tyson's help, and they infer that the car belongs to someone from the Fenario Ranch because there's a piece of cloth with FR written on it, as well as a highly flammable chemical that is used to reduce inflammation in horses. So Dwight looks around the ranch and meets the owner Margaret Devereaux, who doesn't buy Dwight's story about being a private investigator, so she doesn't allow him to question her employees. Dwight waits just outside the ranch to see if he'll recognize anybody coming out, and he does. He follows Armand to his home, but it looks like he'll have to wait for now because Armand has a family. On the business side, Dwight attends a party thrown by Bodhi, and they see a dude getting high on nitrous oxide. Dwight can't believe that people are getting charged $5 a pop, and Bodhi mentions that people get charged $10 a pop at a music festival, which is a name that I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce. But just know that the festival is soon, so Dwight gets in touch with the bar owner Mitch, who agrees to order some nitrous, which he's able to do because of his restaurant. He can put in large orders. If everything goes right, they can take home nearly 100 grand, but let's see if they're gonna encounter any difficulties. In the meantime, Tyson is enchanted by the gangster lifestyle. We see him practicing his trash talk skills in his room, and his father, Mark, looks disappointed again. Throughout this episode, Tyson bugs Dwight about how he can advance going forward, whether he can actually join the mafia, and although Dwight attempts to veer Tyson away, the young lad refuses to bow out. The ATF gets some screen time in this episode as well, starting with a standoff at Edgar Dumont's house. He's a member of a motorcycle gang, Black Macadam, whose leader Waltrip shows up during the standoff and shouts at Dumont that they left him no choice. Dumont gets the message and blows up the house and himself, but at least he lets the dogs out. The gang didn't want the ATF getting their hands on whatever was inside. Later on, at the ATF headquarters, we learn about 3 other members of the gang, as well as the fact that Waltrip did 6 years in prison for major armed robberies, and Dumont, the guy who blew himself up, was his cellmate. Pike is Waltrip's right-hand man. Trucote is an important member, and Roxy is a munitions expert who did 3 tours in Afghanistan. She is relatively new in the gang, but she's a rising star. These suspects will be the ATF's targets going forward. The battle we were all hoping to see between the Italian mafia and the local motorcycle gang kicked off in episode 4, but first let's check in on how things are going for Armand. And well, his neighbor's dog is still dropping deuces on his lawn, which is not ideal, but that's the least of his problems because Dwight surprises him when his family is out. Armand's story goes like this. He has been in Tulsa for 19 years after leaving New York and the mafia behind. He thought Dwight was sent here to kill him, which is why he tried to kill Dwight first. Dwight, in the meantime, thought Armand was sent here by Chicky to kill him, so it's all a big misunderstanding. We also gather from their conversation that Armand was involved in the freak-up that forced Dwight to fall on his sword 25 years ago. Armand was working for Dwight, and it turns out he remained loyal to the general. When the head of the family, Pete, got worried about Dwight flipping, he sent a hitman named Tico Tavares after Dwight, and Armand tried to reach out to Dwight, but he wasn't able to get through. Dwight survived this assassination attempt and killed Tico, and Armand, fearing retribution from Pete and the family for trying to help Dwight, fled to Tulsa. It takes a minute or two for Dwight to process all of this. The story sounds plausible, so he doesn't kill Armand. Instead, Armand now works for Dwight again, and he will have to bring in $300 a week. Armand's wife Clara catches the tail end of this confrontation, and then Armand tells her everything, the fact that he was with the mafia back in New York and why he fled to Tulsa, and before that day he hid everything from her. Alright, now that that's done, time for the Laughing Gas storyline. Tyson and Bodie are selling them for $10 a pop at a music festival. This is when 2 members of Black Macadam approach them to say this is their territory. Tyson laughs them off, pun intended, and these 2 knuckleheads don't do anything about it, which is why their leader Waltrip has them beaten after Roxy calls them weak. These 2, plus a bunch of other gang members, beat up Dwight's men the next night, and Dwight knows he can't let this go unanswered. Bodie employs the services of Badface, who's in town. He is touched because he thinks Dwight values him as a friend, which for some reason not many people do, and that was one of the many hilarious nuggets in this episode. Mark joins in on the revenge tour because his son Tyson got beaten up. Mark and Tyson's scenes in this episode were very convincing. The writers managed to convey the chaotic fighting that can occur in a family very well. Mark obviously doesn't want his son to get involved with the mob, but after growing up in what looks like a rather uptight family, Tyson wants to go to the other extreme end of the spectrum. He wants to be a gangster. So Dwight's crew of misfits, including Bodie's skinny salesman and fat security guard, Tyson's father, a former mobster, Badface, they all show up at the festival, and they even up the odds by using baseball bats, which they use to beat the living crap out of 12 Black Macadam members. Afterward, at Mitch's bar, they're all having a drink and Tyson thinks he's good with his father, but Mark says, "This isn't the bonding moment you think it is." I also liked Mark's line from earlier, before the beatdown, when Tyson wanted to know if Mark followed him, and Mark went, quote, "No, I just set my GPS to dumbass motherfricker," end quote. Mark eventually gives Tyson an ultimatum, telling Tyson that he'll always have a home unless he chooses not to. Tyson makes his decision the next day as we watch him pick up Dwight from the Mayo, so he's going his own way. Other than that, we saw Dwight get in touch with his sister Joanne. They hadn't spoken ever since Dwight went to prison, and she tells him that their brother Joe is dying. Toward the end of the episode, Dwight talks to Joe using FaceTime. Joe's unfortunately got only a few moments left on this earth, and he can't speak, but he's able to hear Dwight, who tells Joe a story from their childhood. Using that story, Dwight tells Joe to embrace what comes next, and that they will catch up later. So after that entertaining clash between Dwight's men and Black Macadam, we have this quite emotional scene that shows us something about Dwight's character. I think it's clear that he loves his brother and sister, but you don't get the sense that he would just roll back the years and choose them over the mafia if he could. Sure, he feels some regret about falling out of touch with his family, but he loves the mafia a bit more than his actual family. But now that he has learned what Pete did, maybe he would roll back the years. But I just think he loves the lifestyle a bit too much. I'm sure you can see the parallels here between Dwight and Tyson. Elsewhere, Armand finally has enough of his neighbor and his dog, so the neighbor gets a beatdown too. Last and absolutely least, Stacy hooks up with a stranger. Dwight returns to New York in episode 5 to attend his brother Joe's funeral, and as you can imagine, the main theme is family, specifically how Dwight neglected them for almost 2 decades when he was in prison. We meet his daughter Tina for the first time at the funeral home. We heard her voice on the phone before, and here she can't even stand looking at him. This tension comes to a head later on at lunch, with Tina criticizing his father's fancy choice of venue, arguing that this isn't about what Uncle Joey or the entire family would like. No, it's about what makes Dwight look like a big shot. This is when we learn that Dwight settled the tab at the memorial company, so he suddenly shows up in town and acts like the benevolent head of the family, and Tina doesn't like that at all. That is why she and her husband Emery leave. Dwight is unable to attend the actual mass. He has to go to the hospital to see the head of the family, Pete, head of the mafia family that is, and afterward Dwight calls his brother's house and says what he wanted to say at the mass. Joe's wife Denise and Dwight and Joe's sister Joanne listen in as Dwight says some nice things. Quote, "Guys like Joe are a rare and precious find, generous to a fault. They don't hold grudges, they unlock potential. They don't show off, they show up." End quote. Then Dwight shows up at his daughter's flower shop to patch things up, and Tina talks about all of the memories she's had without her father. His absence has hurt Tina psychologically during holidays, during important events like her prom night, though more importantly, Dwight's absence has had some physical effects too. One of Dwight's quote-unquote brothers from the mafia assaulted Tina when her mother wasn't home, and that's when Tina learned why this guy had the nickname The Package. She understandably can't and won't discuss this in detail with Dwight, but he infers what he needs to, and even though Tina says she doesn't want him to do anything about it, we all know what's coming next. The head of the family, Pete, is still at the hospital, and so was Nick the Package, but apparently he has left. Dwight has a little chat with Pete about his promise to look after Dwight's family when Dwight was in prison, and he wants to know if Pete knew what happened to Tina. Pete is clueless, so Dwight leaves to take care of Nick. Chicky, Vince, and Goody watch on as Dwight burns and chokes Nick, and Dwight eventually finishes Nick off by bashing his head in, which is probably why they showed Dwight putting on those alligator leather shoes at the start of the episode. Doesn't matter if this father has been absent and distant, primal urges kick in as soon as he learns that his daughter has been harmed, and there's no dilly-dallying around. They cut straight to the chase and show us Dwight getting some good old vigilante justice. Meanwhile, back in Tulsa, Black McAdams strikes back at Dwight's goons by enlisting the help of local law enforcement. Pike, who is Waltrip's right-hand man, gives the license plate of Dwight's car to a couple of highway patrol officers, and they pull over this car, but obviously Dwight isn't in it, he is in New York. They detain Tyson and find the end of a joint that smells like pot, so they take him back to the station. Tyson's been trying to act like a tough guy throughout the season, but he's not able to prove his mettle in the holding cell. He gives up his phone password in exchange for a trip to the bathroom, and the information from the phone leads to Bodhi. Tyson is released soon afterward. They've got his cash and his phone as they didn't lock those in, so they're gone, while the car is impounded. Tyson tried to reach Dwight when he had his phone call when he first got to the station, but he wasn't able to do so because Dwight was busy in New York. Waltrip and his goons kidnap and question Bodhi about what's been going on. Bodhi reveals that Dwight is extorting him for cash, and they continue their chat off-screen. The corrupt officers bring Bodhi to Mitch's bar. They want to have a talk with Mitch as well, but he gives them a proper F-off speech by asserting that his bar is on Cherokee land. So they uncuff Bodhi and go on their merry way. Last but not least, Roxy delivers a warning to Armand at the Fenario Ranch. That's where they both work. We learn that Roxy's father is the Sergeant-at-Arms of Black McAdam, though we don't actually know his name, and she warns Armand not to freak with them. Armand Googles Waltrip at night and learns that Waltrip got away with homicide charges before, so Armand is getting more than he bargained for here. Oh, and the horse compass he stole is back up at the ranch. Let's begin our episode 6 discussion in New York, where Chicky wants to teach Dwight a lesson after he killed Nico in the club without even a warning. None of the guys there knew why Dwight was doing that, and Pete mentions that it had something to do with his daughter. When Chicky suggests taking care of both Dwight and his daughter, the big boss loses it and lashes out at his son. Quote, "If you were half the man Dwight was, this would have never happened," end quote. So Chicky gets humiliated in front of Goody and Vince, and despite his father's warning, Chicky finds a workaround solution to get back at Dwight and his daughter Tina. This happens toward the end of the episode. Chicky attacks Tina's husband Emery and breaks the poor guy's arm. Dwight had already left town at this point, but not before saying goodbye to Tina. She realizes what her father has done, and she has a hard time dealing with it, but Dwight claims he didn't do it for himself or because of some code. No, he did it because even though he doesn't act like it, he is her father and he loves him. Tina is rightly worried about retribution, and she even gets a creepy call at her house one day, and after that, Chicky attacks Emery. It's time to return to Tulsa now and correct a mistake I made in my previous episode breakdown. Roxy said her old man was the Sergeant-at-Arms at Black McAdam, and I mistook that for his father, when in reality she was talking about her boyfriend Pike. How do we know this? Well, it turns out Roxy is an informant for the ATF, and she meets with Stacy and Special Agent Doug Hendricks, and here Roxy reveals that the motorcycle gang has been dealing with some new Italian guy by the name of Dwight, who is selling nitrous and shaking down a weed store. Hendricks alerts the FBI of Dwight's activities despite Stacy's attempt to steer him away, and the FBI shows up at Bodie's house, as well as his store. Luckily though, they don't find anything, and Bodie doesn't talk, he just tells them that Dwight is his business partner. We find out about this after he is released and shows up at Mitch's bar. Before the raid, Stacy got in touch with Dwight and warned him about the FBI. They apparently have wiretaps on the family in New York, and they're hearing some chatter about Dwight and Nico. Thanks to this knowledge, Dwight moved first and emptied the safe at the weed store, so Bodie's merchandise and money are safe. There was a nice moment for Dwight at the bar because he has become disillusioned with his crew back in New York. He told Tina that every bad thing that happened to her happens because he bought into this lie, meaning the mafia. But here in Tulsa, seeing his new crew of misfits together makes him happy. He is starting to form a new family out here. As you know, Armand is one of the members of that new crew, and he works at the Fenario Ranch with Roxy. Roxy and Armand arrange a meeting between Waltrip and Dwight to cool things down, and Dwight shows up to the meeting despite Stacy telling him to stay clear of Waltrip. She even wants Dwight to snitch on Waltrip, and I just found that hilarious because the guy just did 25 years in prison and he did not turn there. So do you really think he's gonna do it now? Anyway, the meeting goes as well as you'd expect. Waltrip draws a line in the sand and Dwight makes it clear that he would cross that line whenever he'd like, because the line does not mean a single thing to him. Waltrip realizes that he needs to send a more firm warning shot, so he reckons a few rounds from a Remington 12 gauge late at night should do the trick. There's a brief moment where we can see Waltrip's bank account balance, which is more than $8 million, so Black McAdam is rolling in cash. Mitch and his father, as well as Dwight, are about to exit the bar when Pike puts Waltrip's plan into action. They all hit the deck, and then Dwight and Mitch make their way outside and shoot Pike, killing him in the process. Prior to this, Dwight had offered to become Mitch's business partner to renovate the bar, and Mitch was hesitant. But after this whole ordeal, they shake on it and become business partners. I'm curious to see how Roxy is gonna react after finding out about Pike's death, because let's just say she doesn't seem like a particularly well-adjusted individual. Pike was Waltrip's right-hand man, so this is no ordinary loss, which is why I think this might be the start of an all-out war. though I think Waltrip's gonna wait for a little while before he strikes back. Goody, who is Pete's consigliere, has booked his ticket to Tulsa to meet with Dwight and sort out this Nico situation. Goody's gonna evaluate Dwight's operation in Tulsa and reports back to Pete, and Pete doesn't really want to mess with Dwight if he keeps getting his cash envelopes every week, so this visit is really important. Lastly, Dwight saves an old horse by the name of Pilot. We've seen this horse before in multiple episodes, and it is about to be put down because it keeps running away and the penalties are becoming too much to handle for the owner. So Dwight prevents that and buys Pilot. It will stay at the Fenario Ranch for now, and Spencer, who Dwight met at his regular coffee shop, will take care of it. My guess is Dwight sees himself in Pilot because they're both old, they're both free souls, and others think they're old news. I think that's why Dwight takes an interest in Pilot and saves it. This move brings Dwight back to Miss Devereaux because she owns the ranch, and their chemistry suggests they're gonna get it on soon. Dwight and Mitch kick off episode 7 by digging a grave to hide Pike's body, and they retrieve his black macadam jacket, which they send to Waltrip. Roxy freaks out after finding out that they killed her boyfriend. She calls Stacy and they meet later in the day. At first, Stacy comforts Roxy, but the ATF is gonna ATF, so she sends Roxy back to the gang's bar to take a look at Waltrip's laptop, as well as his bank account information. We also learned that Roxy was arrested a few months ago and agreed to rat on the gang in exchange for her freedom, so Stacy says that she still has to keep her end of the bargain. The ATF agent then goes to the Mayo to talk to Dwight about what happened to Pike, saying that she could arrest Dwight right now, but we all know she's bluffing. She's got no one to blame but herself. She's a terrible agent, as well as a pretty bad human being. There was no way that sending a grieving informant immediately into an emotionally charged and dangerous situation was gonna end well, and indeed it does not. Waltrip catches Roxy in the act, and he has this twisted way of reassuring her that she's gonna be fine. He pretends like he's gonna take care of her if she takes care of him, but he's just playing games. He can't have a snitch among his ranks, so he strangles her. Stacy tries to reach Roxy, but Waltrip picks up her phone. He says he doesn't see the point in Stacy's leaving a message for Roxy, and Stacy wants to know who this is, and Waltrip goes, quote, "You dialed the number for hell. Who did you think would answer?" End quote. This storyline is about unintended consequences. If Stacy didn't get involved with Dwight all the way back in episode 1, and if they didn't have this complicated relationship, this would have played out differently. She could have gone scorched earth on Dwight's ass, but now she has to think about her own well-being, because Dwight could hurt her career. Waltrip was already an eccentric character that had a decent on-screen presence, but this episode has elevated his villainous status to a whole new level. He was quite scary when he was playing games with Roxy. Elsewhere in Tulsa, Dwight talks to Tina on the phone and learns about the attack on Emery. Dwight thinks his daughter and her family should move to Tulsa to be safer, and Tina actually considers this proposal for a second after she gets another creepy call, but Emery talks her out of it by saying that she's spent the last 7 years in counseling, discussing how Dwight abandoned her, so how's she gonna uproot her family to be near him? Armand and Tyson pick up Goody from the train station, and Goody is surprised to see Armand here after he left the family 25 years ago. Goody meets with Dwight and they clear the air about the whole Nico thing. Goody then evaluates Dwight's operation here. He gets in touch with Pete and Chicky at night to inform them that Dwight's making bank here by extorting a weed store and operating a bar, so no problem on the money front, but he tells them that they might not be able to control Dwight for much longer. We hear about Dwight's plans to renovate the bar when he pays a visit to Bodie's store. Bodie and his crew have cleaned up the place after the FBI raid, and Dwight tells Bodie they can partner up to renovate Mitch's bar and put a casino in the back. The bar is on Cherokee land, which means they can use Jimmy's name to get a license from the Indian Gaming Commission, and Jimmy is Bodie's supplier, by the way. This is gonna set them back close to $500,000, but it's worth it because it will allow them to launder their money. That's when Bodie brings up his side gig. He steals Bitcoin and he's got close to $7.5 million worth of it. Quote, "Did you really think you were the only criminal in Tulsa?" End quote. Bodie is lucky that the FBI didn't find his cold storage wallet hidden behind the hinge, because that would have been the end for him. Later on, Dwight goes on a date with Miss Devereaux. She asked him out on the ranch as he was taking care of Pilot, and it is a weird date. She got divorced after 9 years of marriage, and her ex Brian is a lying sack of you-know-what, and he's got a partial interest in the ranch. She expects Dwight to return the favor and talk about himself, so he talks about his ex and his daughter before bringing up the whole prison thing. He claims that he went to prison for killing a guy who was trapped in a burning building, but he doesn't give any more details. Devereaux is a peculiar lady and wants to know what it feels like to kill someone, and Dwight can't believe it. When he returns to the bar that night, he finds out that Pete has passed away, which will complicate things for him. Let's rewind and talk about Pete. He and his son Chicky get a lot of screen time this week, and for good reason. The cancer is gone, so Pete is gonna be around for a little while longer, which does not please Chicky. In his conversation with a priest, Chicky describes his father as a boulder that he can't get out from under. Back in the day, Chicky wanted to join the army or go to college, but Pete prevented that from happening. He took away and squandered his son's college fund, but he actually took more than just that. He took Chicky's soul. Later on, as Chicky bathes his father, he just has enough of his father's constant insults, and he snaps. He drowns his father and embraces the dark side. I think this was at least partially premeditated, that's why Chicky went to see the priest, but up to this point, until he actually killed Pete, Chicky was mostly pretending. This wasn't the life he wanted to live, so he never bought into it 100%. His wig was the physical manifestation of that, and after getting out from under the boulder, he gets rid of the wig as well. He is finally ready to be the main man. That spells trouble for Dwight and his family because Chicky wants to get rid of them. And that's why Dwight tells Goody he won't show up to the funeral. He doesn't want to get whacked. The 8th episode begins with a hilarious sequence where Dwight and Mitch try to teach their associates how to use guns. They're doing this because they know Black McAdam might come after them following Pike's death, but most of these lads are clueless, especially Tyson. I mean, just look at him. Grace is the only capable shooter, but she doesn't want to be doing this stuff and she expects an apology from Dwight for turning their lives upside down. Dwight does say he is sorry and Grace wants him to lead them out of this mess. And Dwight knows that his army of misfits won't do, so Mitch introduces him to a couple of friends, Moss and Ben, and they will kill without remorse. Also, Jimmy will introduce Dwight to some badass cowboys that can help him, because Badface has apparently been arrested, so he's not available. This conversation takes place at the bar, where Dwight explains the casino plan to Jimmy. Jimmy's name will not be directly tied to all the assets, thanks to an anonymous trust structure. Mitch will transfer the bar ownership to Jimmy, and then Jimmy will be able to get their gaming license. Jimmy's cut will be 20%. Even though Jimmy seems to like the plan, he needs some convincing by Bodie at the wheat store. Jimmy wants to know why Bodie's going into yet another business with Dwight, and Bodie describes the general as a force multiplier. So despite being co-opted, abducted, and raided by the feds, Bodie puts up with it because he's gonna make a lot more money than he otherwise would have. And Jimmy is convinced. In the meantime, Dwight is dealing with the 2 corrupt troopers who arrested Tyson back in episode 5. They're in the pockets of Waltrip, who is now on the run, and we'll get to why that is in a little bit. But the bent coppers pull Dwight and Tyson over, and Dwight slowly walks out of the car and approaches them with his hand under his jacket, saying, quote, "Alright, listen up carefully. My hand is wrapped around a .357 Magnum with 158 grain hollow points that'll leave a hole you could put your freaking fist through. You wanna see your loved ones tonight? I want you to rethink whatever stupid, ill-conceived idea that moronic biker is putting you up to. Get in your car, put it in gear, and drive the frick away." End quote. So basically, Dwight reads the situation perfectly and calls their bluff. He knows they're not really gonna put their lives in danger for Waltrip, so he is successful. They get in their car and drive away. And the funny thing is, Dwight actually forgot his gun back at the hotel, so quite a badass moment here that had a funny ending. Also in this episode, Dwight gets a couple of phone calls, firstly from his daughter Christina. She is still considering moving to Oklahoma, but Dwight puts a pin on that with everything going on in Tulsa. And it will get even more chaotic there because the second phone call is from Chicky, who tells Dwight that he's coming there soon with Goody and Vince. Chicky tries to make it sound like he's trying to make amends, to turn the page, but I don't think Dwight buys it. And it's a good thing that he doesn't buy it, because earlier on, there's a scene in New York showing Chicky discussing his plan to whack Dwight. Johnny the Zip is against his plot, but Chicky makes sure Johnny understands who's the new boss around here. So they're coming to Tulsa to get rid of Dwight. Time to talk about Waltrip now. The FBI has a meeting with the ATF to discuss Dwight's shenanigans, but Stacy manages to turn their attention to Waltrip by bringing up his unreported wealth. Roxy told Stacy about this before she was killed, and the FBI is able to go after Waltrip with this money angle. They raid the Black Macadam headquarters, but Waltrip isn't there, and neither is his lieutenant Trucote. We see this duo outside an abandoned warehouse. They are on the run, and Waltrip is doing some drugs while trying to send the corrupt troopers after Dwight. When that doesn't work, as we already discussed, Waltrip takes matters into his own hands by shooting at Dwight outside the Mayo. Dwight is having an argument with Stacy when Waltrip and Trucote ride in. Stacy spots them and everyone starts shooting. Trucote gets hit and falls from his bike. He is probably dead. It looks like Stacy gets shot in the abdomen area, so Dwight gets her to cover and Waltrip rides away. Tyson, who had just dropped Dwight off, comes back to check in on this situation, and Dwight gives Tyson the gun he used, and he tells Tyson to hide it, so Tyson drives off. Then police surround the area and ask Dwight if he was involved in the shooting. Now, even though Dwight gave the gun to Tyson, there had to be security cameras outside the hotel showing Dwight firing his gun, and there's going to be gunshot residue on his hands. This is a problem because he's a felon, so he can't legally own a firearm, and if this wasn't a TV show, he would probably be going back to prison, but I guess they're not going to bring up the CCTV footage, and Dwight will go free. Anyway, why was Stacy outside the Mayo to talk to Dwight? Well, she was there to rant about how Dwight ruined her life. She felt like she had to divert the FBI's attention away from Dwight because his going down would not be ideal for her career because her involvement with him would come up. We also saw her talking to her therapist, and it is revealed that Dwight reminds her of her father. The two things everyone wants to see: daddy issues and the ATF. Great. There are a few other things we have to discuss before we wrap this up. Firstly, Stacy learns about Dwight's relationship with Miss Devereaux when the FBI is discussing what they have on Dwight, and Stacy is clearly jealous, which is one of the reasons she goes to see Dwight. And talking of Devereaux, Dwight meets her ex-husband Brian, who apparently has not given up on her, so he draws a line in the sand and warns Dwight not to cross it. Dwight obviously dismisses Brian's warning. Elsewhere, Tyson makes his decision and leaves his family's home after saying goodbye to his father, while Armand's wife decides to get a divorce after he makes it clear that he's done with running away. So both Armand and Tyson are choosing the life over their families. The season 1 finale starts with a flashback to 1997. Chicky, Vince, and Armand are at an abandoned apartment building in Brooklyn, where Chicky and Vince are torturing Ripple, who they think crossed them. Armand, in the meantime, believes they're going too far because they break the poor guy's leg and even brand his face. That is why Armand calls Dwight, and once he gets there, he puts a stop to this clown fiesta. However, the torch they use to heat up the branding metal spreads fire around the building, and they all have to run away. The problem is, Chicky can't find the handcuff keys, so Dwight tries to shoot the cuffs, but it's made of chromium steel so it doesn't break. And since there's no way to get Ripple out in time, Dwight decides to shoot him instead of letting him burn to death. The others have left by this point, and Dwight is the last one to get out, and outside the building he is greeted by cops and is arrested. That's in line with the main theme of this episode, which is no good deed goes unpunished, and Dwight spends 25 years in prison for Chicky and Vince's mistake, and for being merciful toward Ripple. Despite this sacrifice, the head of the family, Pete, still tried to have Dwight killed in prison, and the new head of the family, Pete's son Chicky, has a similar idea in mind in the present, as he makes his way to Tulsa to whack Dwight. The general was in chains for a quarter of a century for a dumbass like Chicky, and yet Chicky is still an ungrateful piece of crap. Talking of prison and getting arrested, Dwight is held at the police station overnight following the incident outside the Mayo, so we are back to the present, and Bodhi sends a lawyer for Dwight, and because he's not being charged, he's able to get out. Dwight immediately visits Stacy to see how she's doing, and she's fine considering the circumstances. Dwight asserts that he's gonna go after Waltrip, but Stacy believes he must be in the win now with how much money he's got. So Stacy mentions that the ATF has Waltrip's account information, which will be important later on in the episode. For now though, Stacy is worried that she's gonna lose her job because her tie to Dwight will be exposed, and Dwight says he's gonna make it up to her somehow, and that will turn out to be a costly mistake. The General is rolling with two of Mitch's friends he hired in episode 8, and another duo has joined the team thanks to Jimmy, which is smart because Waltrip isn't going anywhere and he's gonna come after Dwight. Waltrip is completely unhinged. He shoots one of his men because he dared question his strategy. He insists that they're gonna stick around despite the ATF and the FBI's presence in town in order to go after Dwight, who he describes as a parasite that they must cut out. Back at the Mayo, Armand informs Dwight that Chicky has arrived in Tulsa, and Dwight says he would understand it if Armand wanted to lay low for a while. Armand talks about how he ran away from New York because he was too scared to face Chicky, and he doesn't want to feel like a coward anymore, which is why he's sticking around even if it costs him his marriage. Later on in the episode, Dwight has a similar heart-to-heart moment with Tyson. The General says he's sorry for getting Tyson involved in all of this, but the young lad doesn't think Dwight has anything to be sorry about. He believes that Dwight has allowed him to forge his own identity, make his own choices, stand up for what he believes in, take what he wants, and look after his friends. That's the life he wants to live, and Dwight has shown him it's possible, so he is grateful. Back to this Chicky matter, Dwight and company surprise Chicky and his entourage at their hotel. Dwight tells Chicky to pack his stuff, get on a friggin' plane, and stay the frick out of his town. So Dwight cuts ties with the Invernizzi family, and he gives Goody 3 seconds to abandon Chicky and stay here in Tulsa. I lost it when Dwight pointed at Chicky and said, "Look at him, friggin' Kojak." I laughed for like 10 seconds straight because Dwight's demeanor was hilarious, but at the same time it was imperious. He made it clear that he had the upper hand, his men surrounded the area, and gave Chicky no choice but to leave. After Dwight takes care of that problem, he gives a great motivational speech to his associates at the bar and welcomes Goody to the club. Dwight gives everyone two choices. They either get scared and give up, or they say frick it, and they barrel through it. He argues that if they take the second option and come out on the other side, they'll be stronger than they ever thought was possible. Everybody sticks around. The next night, Waltrip and his goons attack the bar. Dwight and company are ready. They even have a tripwire grenade setup, which takes out some bikers when they first enter the bar, and it's looking good until Armand and Tyson get shot. The bullets don't hit any vital organs, but Tyson is in a bad spot, and he could be overrun soon, which is why Dwight flanks the bikers. He takes out two of them and reaches Tyson to check his wound, and that's when another biker almost gets to them and kills them. Luckily though, Grace comes to their rescue. She takes out multiple targets, leaving only Waltrip to deal with. Dwight jumps at Waltrip, they go back and forth, and the General gets the better of him. Dwight pushes Waltrip's head against the horn trophy, and he finishes the job with a bullet to the head. That was a great way to end this Black McAdam storyline. The battle at the bar was entertaining to watch, and Dwight's mean look at Waltrip as he killed him was hauntingly realistic. Then we have a 3-month time jump. Tina and her kids have come to Tulsa and they're riding Pilot. Tina even calls Dwight dad for the first time in a long time, and Dwight is just incredibly happy. They reopen the bar, which is now also a casino, and Dwight and Tina have a father-daughter dance, but Dwight is asked to go outside. As I said before, the theme here is that no good deed goes unpunished, and Dwight realizes that once he steps outside, because Stacy and the feds arrest him. But why? Well, because earlier on in the episode, Bodhi hacked into and gained access to Waltrip's accounts containing more than $8 million, hence the timing of the attack on the bar. And then Dwight gifted Stacy $1 million because he promised that he would make it up to her, and he thought she was done with the ATF, so he tried to set her up with $1 million. However, the ATF agrees not to prosecute Stacy, and they agree to reinstate her in 6 months in exchange for information that will bring down Dwight. She gives them the USB stick gifted to her by Dwight, which contains the account information, and Dwight is arrested for the attempted bribery of a federal agent. This is a heartbreaking moment for two reasons. Firstly, Dwight felt guilty for upending Stacy's life even though she's a grown-ass woman that made her own choices. She didn't have to protect Dwight from the inside, she chose to do that. So Dwight wasn't actually at fault at all, but he still tried to make it up to her by giving her that USB drive. Over the course of season 1, I've regularly talked about my antipathy towards Stacy, and I feel entirely justified in my analysis after watching this episode. I get that she was facing prosecution if she didn't turn on Dwight, but he wasn't the one who put her in this situation. It was Stacy herself. Now, that's why I think she's an excellently written character, because her traits sum up the freaked up organization that she's a part of. The way she pushed Roxy and caused her death at the hands of Waltrip, the way she betrayed Dwight and threw him to the wolves, her lack of accountability, her self-centered worldview, and so on. She's like a horse with blinkers on, and I think that is a good description of the ATF. They don't actually realize that they're the bad guys. And secondly, Tina is having to watch her father get taken away yet again just when things were starting to get better. She wants her father to tell her this isn't happening again, but all he can say is that he is sorry. If convicted, Dwight is facing up to 15 years in prison, and that is how season 1 of Tulsa King concludes. Thank you for watching my recap of Tulsa King Season 1. If you'd like, you can check out my individual episode breakdowns, which feature more of my thoughts on each episode. The link to that playlist is in the description box, and so is the link to the news about whether Tulsa King has been renewed or cancelled. Leave your Season 1 comments down below, like this video if you've enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe for more movie reviews and TV show breakdowns. That is it for now, take care and see you in the next video.